I chose to do my presentation on reflex integration therapy, and although I have not seen this at my fieldwork, I did have the opportunity to observe a local OT, Jim Vuctavine from Family Tree Services in Grand Rapids, use this therapy with some of his clients. At its core, reflex integration therapy is designed to facilitate the emergence, maturation, and integration or reintegration process of primary reflex motor patterns for anyone, regardless of condition or age, in order to promote efficient and coordinated movement patterns that support functional performance. Dysfunctional reflex patterns are diagnosed and replaced over time by functional motor responses. Age-appropriate activities are used to integrate dysfunctional reflexes, helping the brain communicate better with the body and rebuild the neural network foundation of the nervous system. Reflex integration therapy has its roots in Eastern Europe, where knowledge from the disciplines of neurology, physiology, psychology, biology, and endocrinology was integrated to create a new interdisciplinary theory focusing on the integration of reflexes and their influence in normal motor function. Most of the evidence-based research is only available in Russian or Polish. Reflexes are automatic motor responses that occur each time a stimulus or combination of stimuli is presented. A reflex is a genetic pattern of physiological function created by nature as a code and structure ensuring neurosensory motor development. From Svetlana Muskatava of the Svetlana Muskatava Education Institute, working with reflexes, you touch the underlying net, a net that serves like the infrastructure of a leaf or a building. A reflex is the informal unit for positive survival and gradual physical, emotional, and cognitive development. Reflexes assist with development, growth, and survival, shaping the brain through the progressive development of balance, mobility, hearing, speaking, learning, and communication. And as we all know, those things are all necessary for any kind of daily participation in activities. Primary motor reflex patterns do not disappear, they integrate. The Babinski sign pictured here was one of the targeted reflexes that Jim Vuctavine was working to integrate in the sessions that I observed with his clients at Family Tree Therapies. Dominance or reemergence of primitive reflex movement patterns, as often occurs in neurotrauma, can interfere with a client's occupational performance. Often, brain injuries from trauma or ischemia result in reversion to primitive reflexes, most often on the side contralateral to the injury. These reflexes result in involuntary maladaptive movement on the affected side when moving the non-affective side. This creates an overall dysfunctional movement pattern. Through reflex integration therapy, the reemergence of primary reflexes can be corrected and functional movement patterns restored. Through systematic testing for the developmental appropriate integration of primary motor reflexes, the therapist can determine the level of brainstem involvement that is blocking adaptive motor responses. Additionally, isolating the dysfunctional reflex pattern guides intervention, targeting those reflexes in an effort to integrate them through repetition of purposeful movement. This is an interesting table taken from the Svetlana Muskatova Educational Institute website that is similar to the one that was shown to me at Family Tree Therapies in what they call the Reflex Integration Bible. It breaks down different aspects of diagnoses by dysfunctional reflex profile. I thought it was useful to see how diagnoses and/or behavior were linked with specific reflexes. Not all of the reflexes are always deintegrated. It could be just one or two that's actually hindering performance. Although reflex integration was developed primarily as a pediatric intervention, it is being used increasingly in adult populations. It can be effective for adults who have experienced neurological trauma or have a degenerative neurological disease such as MS or Alzheimer's. The focus of this presentation is on adults who have suffered a neurotrauma either through TBI or stroke. This is a quote from my personal communications with Jim Vuctavine explaining that reflex integration is not just for pediatric populations. It can be used with anyone who exhibits reemerging primitive reflexes. What he says is that the principle is the same, whether it's a child or an adult. It's the rewiring and the remyelinating of the pathways to be adequate and efficient for both the sensory and the motor pathways. He does confirm what I said, that there is a bunch of research out there, but you have to be able to read Russian and Polish. They're working on translating the work to put it into a big book, but it's just not out yet. Frequency of treatment is situational depending on the needs of each client. As with all OT intervention, third-party payers can dictate frequency and duration of treatment unless clients are paying out of pocket. The clients that I observed at Family Tree Therapies were seen 2 to 3 times per week at the clinic, and they also had daily home programs. After evaluation by a trained therapist, dysfunctional reflexes are identified and a treatment plan, including that home exercise program, is designed. Treatment must address each dysfunctional primitive reflex. Just to give you an idea, here are a few examples of dysfunctional reflexes and how they impact performance, as well as how they can be addressed through reflex integration therapy. The asymmetric tonic neck reflex, or the ATNR, is something that we learned about in our pediatric semester. To test for this, the client's head is turned 90 degrees to one side, and then both upper extremities are checked for the asymmetrical extensor flexor tone. Clients with an unintegrated ATNR can have difficulty maintaining their head in a midline while visually scanning or moving their eyes past the midline. The asymmetric movement of the arms can make it really difficult to eat, manipulate objects bilaterally, or be independent in self-care. Reflex integration works to reintegrate this reflex by repeatedly passively turning the head to one side while inhibiting the extensor and flexor tone in the arms. An extra pair of hands may be necessary for this at first until the client is able to voluntarily assist with the movements. Another reflex that I thought would be a good example of someone trying to recover from a stroke is the flexor withdrawal. In the flexor withdrawal, the client will exhibit flexion at the ankle, knee, and hip whenever the sole of the foot is touched. As you can see, this could significantly interfere with clients attempting to ambulate or transfer because their foot will pull up off of the floor whenever the sole of their foot touches the hard floor. Reflex integration treatment involves holding the client's lower extremities in extension while the bottom of the foot is touched. There are some really great videos on primitive reflex patterns that you can watch on the link that I've provided here. I would have loved to have included them, but they were all about 5 minutes apiece, so I just didn't have enough time. But they do talk about different primitive reflexes, how they affect function, and what the treatment is through reflex integration therapy. In the literature, the reflex integration therapy is relatively new, and the majority of the research published is not available in English, like I mentioned before. In order to find support for this theory, I went back through the existing literature that focused mostly on treatment with children and looked back at the scientific research that linked reflex integration with functional performance. A significant cornerstone of this theory is the idea of brain plasticity. Brain plasticity, as you know, refers to the ability of the brain to reorganize itself, changing the relationships within its neural structure according to experience and environmental demands. All brains have the same basic plan. What differentiates them is sensory experience. These experiences influence motor elements that generate action, and association elements that link the sensory and motor systems. Sometimes these links are direct, like in reflexes, and sometimes they are complex networks that utilize feedback and conscious adaptation. The brain has a definite use it or lose it factor. Research shows that increased cortical activity results in neurogenesis, which is the creation of new neurons, as well as changes in the density of brain tissue, which shows the creation of more synapses, in whichever areas are stimulated. The good news for adults with neurotrauma is that these changes continue throughout the lifespan. Adult brains are able to reorganize and form new neural pathways. Most new cells are actually formed in response to exercise, antidepressant treatment, or sexual activity. These new neurons are incredibly responsive to their environment and form new connections based on repeated stimulation. The brain habitually and selectively attends to input and stimulation, resulting in neural pruning to improve efficiency. Functional pathways are reinforced, while those seldom used atrophy and fade away. This ties in directly with the theory behind reflex integration therapy. New neurons can be created and molded to reintegrate functional reflex patterns into the brain's motor planning, improving the motor patterns of the client. The most significant cost of this treatment is the continuing education and certification that it requires. I have 2 examples here of fairly local classes that are coming up, and you can see that they're 4 days or 2 days long the first one runs $675 and the second one costs $570. According to Jim Vuctavine again, he says that he thinks the cost as well as the travel that's most often involved is what keeps a lot of people from taking the classes. The clinic of family tree therapies used to be all self-pay, but now you can see that they're accepting Blue Cross Blue Shield. Other clinics take insurance and they are getting reimbursed for reflex integration therapy. Family Tree Services is starting to be reimbursed as well, as long as they are billing under lack of motor coordination diagnoses from the doctor. As a clinic, he says they've talked about to the higher-ups in the insurance companies and they like what's going on. The big step, he says, is to educate parents, doctors, insurance, and even the Grand Valley education systems and what we're doing so that people can come to know how important reflex integration therapy is and what broad populations it can be used for. In conclusion then, neurotrauma can result in the reemergence of primitive reflexes. Reflex integration therapy, based on interdisciplinary evidence, works within the brain's own plasticity capabilities in an effort to reintegrate reflexes and reestablish functional performance. Occupational therapists need to have a working understanding of the importance of developmental reflex integration to assist their clients in increasing their ability to successfully participate in valued occupational engagement.